The French Revolution was followed by a huge amount of executions that took place across the nation. The Reign of Terror, as it was known, saw around 16,000 people being led to the guillotine, the infamous execution device that took the head off the French king, Louis XVI. The French royal family before the execution had been viewed with huge contempt and animosity, as whilst people were starving all across the nation, they were living incredibly lavish lifestyles and were spending huge sums of money. But following the execution of the French king, there was a queen who was rotting in prison, and it would be months before Marie Antoinette herself was led to the guillotine. She was a woman who was greatly hated across France, but on the 16th of October 1793, at the age of 37, she was executed in the very same place that her husband was. But what is the story of the execution of Marie Antoinette, the French queen? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Marie Antoinette was an Austrian princess, and she was just the age of 14 when she was married to the Dauphin of France, Louis, whose grandfather was the French king. The fact she was Austrian would haunt her throughout her life in France, and she would be rather unpopular. Louis was not the most attentive husband, and there were a huge number of scandals that the royal family were involved in. They did have children, but one of the most severe scandals was a diamond necklace affair, and the Queen was accused of having formed a dodgy relationship with a cardinal, who would then be linked to stealing a huge piece of jewellery for the Queen. But at this time people were starving and suffering across the French nation, but many believed that Marie was controlling the king. She was spending huge amounts of money on furniture and decorating the royal households and palaces, depleting the national treasury to a huge extent. Rebellion would break out, with events such as the storming of the Bastille and the March on Versailles taking place, and this led to the abdication of the French monarchy, with the king and queen being taken into custody. King Louis XVI would be executed, and following this Marie Antoinette was left imprisoned, along with her sister-in-law and her children. Her 8-year-old son Louis Charles was recognised by royalists as the rightful king, but with her husband's death it made Marie a widow. Marie was sick with grief, and she would haunt her rooms inside the prison, the Tower of the Temple, a prison in Paris where she was held by the revolutionary government. Following her husband's death, she hardly spoke and hardly ate, and she would not go into the gardens for fresh air, as she had to walk past her dead husband's rooms and quarters. She became sick and pale, and her hair went white because of the stress. But she thought the worst was over, and prison guards withdrew slightly, and Marie was allowed to commission a new black dress so that she could mourn her husband. She thought that her children and herself would gain their freedom. She had not been accused of any crimes at the time, and the National Convention were not focused on charging her with any crime. But Louis XVI had previously been told before his execution that there would not be an execution of his wife and family. At the time the Austrians were fighting the French, and many thought that Marie was a she-wolf. Robespierre wanted her brought in front of a revolutionary tribunal for trial, and said she passed military secrets to the enemies of the French. But there would be further persecutions of the old royal family, and the Queen was subjected to many searches of her chambers, and her windows were then barred. The Queen's life was now under threat again. There were rejections of ransoming Marie Antoinette, and the Holy Roman Emperor, her nephew, would not do much to save her. Attempts to rescue her did not go well, but her situation got worse. Across France a terror or the reign of terror was taking place, in which thousands of executions were occurring of those who were suspected of being in support of the old regime, and because of this many members of the monarchy were being executed on the guillotine. One evening, commissioners arrived at the temple, and they told Marie that they had to take her son. They had allegedly found out about a plot to abduct the prince, and they wanted to take him to a more secure room. But the reality was not this. Marie saw this lie and refused to give up her son, and for an hour she refused to give him over, and she was threatened to be killed if she did not. They also threatened to kill her daughter, but she then gave him away, and he would never see his mother again. The plan was to re-educate the boy in the spirit of the Republic, and to erase any notion of monarchism from his mind. But the man doing this was a beast, and he would beat the prince every time he found him crying. But Marie Antoinette would be linked to the Carnation plot. She was taken under armed escort to the prison of the Conciergerie, which was a dark and damp prison which was considered a final stop for prisoners who would be taken to the guillotine. She was referred to as Prisoner 280, and she was under heavy guard, and she was given little privacy. She had a 4-foot-high curtain which she would use to go to the toilet behind and dress in, but one of her visitors would drop a carnation at her feet. When Marie picked this up, she saw a hidden note saying about a rescue mission, where she would be taken to Germany. But one of the guards gave the plot away and lost his nerve, but Marie was then held inside a more secure cell and was interrogated. But then she was brought to trial, and one man stated that he was promised the head of Marie Antoinette. She was awoken from her sleep and was brought to the Revolutionary Tribunal. Marie was accused of a number of charges and she denied them all, but she had only hours to prepare her defence. The Queen's trial took place on the 14th of October 1793, and she was clearly sick and pale. She was a shadow of her former self, and she then had a gruelling cross-examination. She was met with some bizarre and strange rumours and accusations, and her trial was brutal. At 4 in the morning of the 16th of October, she was found guilty of the 3 main charges: conspiring with foreign powers, the depletion of the state treasury, and of committing high treason against the French state. With this, she was sentenced to death, and when she was told of this, she offered no words. She was told that she would be executed later that day. In her final hours, Marie Antoinette was allowed to write a number of letters. She wrote expressing the regret she had in leaving her children and said, "You know that I have lived on only for them, and for you, my dear and tender sister." She said she would be rejoining her husband, who was executed months before. Marie asked people close by her to look after her children, and after writing the letters she refused to eat any breakfast. She believed that any food would be pointless, as everything was over for her. But then the humiliating preparation for the execution would occur, and the prison guards had her dressed in a plain white dress, and her hair was cut short, so that her neck would be exposed to the guillotine blade, and that her head would be taken off cleanly, without any problems. Marie's hands were also then tied tightly. She was then loaded into an open cart, before she was taken to the site of her execution. Her husband had been given a closed cart to take him to his execution. However, Marie Antoinette would be given nothing of this. On the journey to the executioner's scaffold, thousands of people would see her and jeer at her, throwing things and screaming insults. But then she arrived at the Place de la Révolution, where a guillotine stood on the scaffold. The crowds had gathered to see the execution of the Queen, and she was helped off the cart, and she made her way up the steps. At this moment, Marie then stood on the foot of the executioner, the very same man who had taken the head off her husband. She apologised for this, and her final words were said to have been, "Pardon me, sir, I did not do it on purpose." Following this, she was strapped to the executioner's board, and she was quickly slid under the executioner's blade. Sansom, the executioner, made a number of checks before he then quickly released the blade. Within seconds, Marie Antoinette's head was taken clean off, and the executioner then held it up and showed it to the jeering crowd. Following her execution, Marie Tussaud, or Madame Tussaud, made a death mask of her head, and her body was then taken and thrown in an unmarked grave, but it would later be exhumed and buried in the Basilica of Saint-Denis. But for many people of the Revolution, Marie Antoinette encapsulated all of the issues and problems with the monarchy and the old regime. She was a woman who plunged the country into further financial problems and issues by her expensive tastes, and she did not seem too bothered about the plight of the peasants and those who were suffering in the land. She was a woman who gambled, and who in her final months lived a life which was very different to what she was used to. However, her execution was a savage one, and she was one of thousands who were executed on the guillotine in Paris, as each day dozens of heads would roll inside of the French capital. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.